the December LIHEAP webinar on working with tribal leadership. My name is Benita Sinaraja, and you should have all received an email from me notifying you about this webinar. So I hope you appreciated that and all the reminders that I sent out. I'm part of the OCS contracted LIHEAP technical assistance team at Brilliant, and I'm so pleased to be here to help out today with this webinar. You are currently all in listen-only mode. After dialing into the webinar, you should have entered in your access code and audio PIN, which are located on that control panel on the right side of your screen. And it's really important that you enter in that audio PIN, as that enables me to unmute your line so that you're able to speak on the call when you want to ask a question or share a story or whatnot. When it's time for question and answers, you can enter your questions into the questions box on the side of your control panel, or you can click on the raised hand icon as well, which is also in your control panel. And please note that this call is being recorded just for the purpose of taking notes. All right? And I should also mention that all of the slides that you're going to see today and the webinar recording will be posted in a couple of weeks on the Performance Measurement website under the Grantee Resources. And I'll have a link to that page at the end of the presentation. So today, for our webinar, we're going to have an overview from Lauren, and she's going to cover kind of the responsibilities, requirements, and what it means to have tribal leaders involved with the LIHEAP program. And then we're really pleased we have speakers from 2 tribes who are going to present today on their experiences with the LIHEAP program, and then we'll save about 30 minutes or so at the end for some questions and answers. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Lauren.
With this webinar today, we're very excited to be launching the first of 6 webinars in partnership with Brilliant over this federal fiscal year 2015. And we wanted the first one to really focus on the tribal LIHEAP and kind of preparing you at the start of this fiscal year for things to expect over the next few months from our perspective. And we want to hear from you in terms of what we can do to help you as you administer your programs this year. So thank you to taking some time today to participate on this webinar with us. And as Benita mentioned, I'm just going to cover a few slides very briefly about the overview of the program and some general requirements and responsibilities, and then really kind of jump into that relationship that your tribal LIHEAP coordinators have with your tribal leadership and trying to work as a team to have an effective LIHEAP. So with that, I'm going to kind of jump right into what is LIHEAP. And so, as you probably all know, the Low-Income Home Energy Assistance Program is a program that primarily helps with covering the home heating and cooling costs for households. It can also, at your option, the grantee's option, provide some minor residential weatherization assistance and repairs and replacements to heating and cooling equipment. Your furnace, air conditioners provide in-kind benefits like fans, blankets, what have you. And so the federal statute requires that we really try to target the highest level of LIHEAP assistance to those that have the greatest home energy need. And really that's trying to focus on those people that are most vulnerable to having their home heating and cooling at unsafe or unhealthy temperatures. So you might think of your elders and how they might be especially sensitive to even small changes in indoor temperature and how that can affect their wellness in terms of any illnesses they may have or any medication they're on may make their systems a little more sensitive to those small temperature changes. And likewise with young children, we know that even inadequate home temperatures can really affect the developmental growth of young kids. So we're really trying to make sure that our most vulnerable members are really getting the highest level of LIHEAP assistance. So, as you know, we are under a temporary budget for 2015. Congress is working today to to try to issue the next either temporary budget or the final budget for 2015. Of the money that we were appropriated at the beginning of this fiscal year, we were able to release 90% of the funding available to grantees, so roughly $3 billion to our states, tribes, tribal organizations, and territories that had submitted complete LIHEAP plans. And we released that funding on October 15th. As you know, we actually invited tribal leadership from a wide variety of tribes. So some of you on the phone today actually may not be directly funded tribes currently for LIHEAP. So we're giving a little bit of background so that you understand how it works if you have a direct relationship with us as opposed to being served by the state. So at the federal level, the program is part of the U.S. Department of Health and Services, and our agency within HHS is the Administration for Children and Families. And within that, we're in the Office of Community Services. So you may hear any one of those acronyms, OCS, ACF, HHS, that just basically means us. We're your main contacts for LIHEAP. So aside from the regular block grant funding, there are some additional funding streams related to LIHEAP that don't necessarily come up every year, but could be potential sources of funding if you're a directly funded LIHEAP grantee. That includes emergency contingency funds, which are basically released on an as-needed basis at the discretion of the head of HHS and the president to respond to any sort of natural disasters like Hurricane Katrina and other crises that might affect home energy. There's also something called reallotment funds. So you might recall, if you're a grantee of ours currently, that we require you to submit a carryover and reallotment report every August 1st. And that's for the fiscal year in which you're operating your program. And so that basically gives our office a heads up to let us know if you think you're not going to be able to use all of our funding by the end of that grant period. Because remember, 90% of the federal LIHEAP funds you get from us must be obligated or legally committed to a specific LIHEAP purpose within that federal fiscal year in which you receive the award letter. So the reallotment is basically any unused money at the end of that year that we then take and redistribute to all of our current LIHEAP grantees in the next year. So usually that works out to a very small additional grant. We did a reallotment award this past June of money that was left over from 2013. So some of you might have gotten an additional award letter of $25 or $100, a small amount, because we're trying to spread it over all of our grantees. And we have over 200 grantees, of which over 150 are tribes and tribal organizations. And then we have two additional programs called the Leveraging Incentive Program and the Residential Energy Assistance Challenge Program, or REACH. And these are two funding streams that, depending on the appropriation from Congress, we may or may not have funding for in a given year. The last year we awarded these was in 2012. And basically, leveraging would be an additional application that our current LIHEAP grantees would submit to us to try to get a grant in recognition of any sort of coordination they've done to supplement their LIHEAP with non-federal resources. So, for example, if you've gotten donations from Home Depot of fans or air conditioning units, the value of that donation could be considered leveraging of non-federal resources, and you could receive an additional grant from us in recognition of that extra work you did on that. And with the REACH program, that is a separate application as well, and that's only given out to a few grantees in a given year, and basically is to fund a small-scale pilot demonstration of really trying to connect home energy assistance to the health and safety of all the household members. So, for example, we have funded projects in the past where they use the money to try to develop a checklist or a screening tool that they could distribute to the medical community, such as doctors in low-income medical clinics. And that way the doctors would be aware of home energy insecurity and be basically referring certain people, certain clients that they see to the LIHEAP office if they are worried that they may not have adequate home energy. Next slide, please. So again, who's the target recipients for LIHEAP? It's low-income households, and you as our directly funded grantee have the discretion to set the income eligibility up to the greater of 150% of the federal poverty level, and we publish that that information each year through an information memorandum on our website, usually in the spring timeframe, or 60% of state median income. So you can really set your eligibility for LIHEAP anywhere up to the greater of those two levels, but not lower than 110% of federal poverty level. You also have the option to try to reduce your administrative costs in terms of the eligibility determination that you make for the LIHEAP applications you receive from people. And so you can decide that households that are receiving other types of assistance, such as TANF, the Temporary Assistance for Needy Families, or what used to be the Food Stamps Program, now called the Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Program, or SNAP, Supplemental Security Income Program, SSI, or certain veterans programs. You can decide which of those programs you might want to have categorically eligible determinations, where basically the benefit letter from those programs can be your LIHEAP office's way of saying because they received TANF, they are automatically eligible for LIHEAP. And so that basically reduces the amount of work you need to do on the determination of those applications, and then it really allows you to just focus on, okay, now that we know this household is eligible, how much of a benefit for LIHEAP should they get? So you don't have to repeat the whole income screening and look at pay stubs and all that kind of stuff. But it's your choice. You don't have to do categorical eligibility. You can certainly do your own income determinations as well. Next slide. So looking at the requirements, as you probably are aware, this is a federal block grant program. So unlike a discretionary program where the federal statute and regulations are very specific about what you can and cannot use the federal funds for, a block grant really was designed by Congress to put the maximum flexibility in the hands of the grantees, the states and the tribes and the territories, to really design their LIHEAP to meet the unique needs of their area. So again, we've already given you some examples of income eligibility and how you can decide what the income eligibility cutoff will be for your tribe within those federal maximums. For those of you who are direct grantees, you know that every September 1, you are required to submit an annual application for funding, which is what we call the LIHEAP plan. And the LIHEAP plan includes a section where your tribal chairperson or his or her designee must certify to 15 assurances in our LIHEAP statute. And those basically cover a wide range of things that you'll do, including the income eligibility cutoffs, making sure you don't go above those maximums, making sure you don't exceed roughly 10% of administrative costs, things of that nature. So it's very important that your tribal leadership is well aware of what those assurances are, and so that they understand when they're certifying, when they're basically putting their name on the LIHEAP plan, that they are telling us they're going to really make sure that your program is in compliance with those 15 requirements. And here we've provided a link to a tribal manual that really is a great document for all grantees, but particularly for newer coordinators and for your tribal leadership, where you can get a sense of the different types of policy decisions that you'll need to walk through, and kind of the different documents, manuals that you can create for yourself to really flesh out how your program is going to work. Because again, remembering this is a block grant program, we don't spell out all the different ways you have to run your program. We don't define, for example, what are administrative costs. So that means each of you will have to kind of sit down and think, okay, for our LIHEAP, what do we consider administrative costs? And make sure you have a written policy in your manual that spells that out so that all of your staff are aware of that. And then when our staff come out and monitor your program, or your annual auditor comes out and reviews your program, everyone's clear on what your rules are for your LIHEAP. Next slide, please. So again, block grant program, you as a grantee have the primary responsibility for administering the program. You're really the front line. You're the ones who are setting these parameters of who qualifies for the program and designing your application and deciding how many staff you're going to have running your LIHEAP. And some things to think about when you're deciding how many staff to have for the program, because often we may hear, well, we have one person running the program, or we have one part-time person running the program. We caution about whether that's really going to be sufficient for you to have an effective LIHEAP, because keep in mind that LIHEAP is really a seasonal program insofar as there are certain times of year where you're going to see a peak in the need for assistance. So depending on where you're located in the country, right now you may be buried in snow and have sub-zero weather, and so you're going to be seeing a lot of long lines of people who might be disconnected from their electric, or might be having a shutoff notice and about to be disconnected, or they're having trouble getting a deliverable fuel vendor to send a shipment of propane out. And so you're going to see a peak time where people are coming in to apply. So you want to make sure that even if you have to bring on staff temporarily, some seasonal staff, that you have enough people who can really meet those peak times of year where you're going to really have a high intake burden. Next slide, please. So looking at the responsibilities, I'm just going to kind of run through these next few slides pretty briefly. I already mentioned that there's an annual plan that is due every September 1. It is very important to keep in mind two different requirements related to the plan. First, that September 1 deadline is actually set in our federal statute. So we really don't have any flexibility to waive that deadline unless we receive a written extension request that is very specific and says, I need until September 15th or October 1st. Whatever date you think is going to be reasonable to submit your plan needs to be in that letter, needs to be signed, and it needs to be sent both to our office as well as to the state office in which your reservation is located, because our statute requires that any submission after September 1 have an approved extension by both the state and our office. And the reason why the state has to weigh in on that is merely because the allocations that we separate out and award directly to tribal grantees are taken out of the state allocations based on the funding formula that is set in our federal statute. And so if a tribe is deciding they're not going to be directly funded by us in a given year, we really need to know that by September 1 so that we can let the state know, okay, you're now going to be serving those members. Or likewise, if a tribe is going to submit this year and not be served by the state, we need to let the state know so that they know, look, you're not going to be serving those members, and we need to take that money so that we can ensure the tribe can run their program and get it started up as quickly as possible. So there's that, the way the formula is in our statute really has a real interplay between how much the state funding gets and how much each tribe gets. And then also remember, because we're using a web-based system called OLDC, it is a statutory requirement that your tribal chief and chairperson certify and sign the plan. And that has to be done electronically through OLDC, which means your tribal chief, unless they designate someone else in writing, must have their own OLDC account and must certify and sign under that account so that their name and title appears in the certification section. Next slide. Another requirement of the federal statute is that you vary the benefit level that you're going to provide to each household based on the unique mix of that household. And that's based on the total number of members in the household, the total household income, and at least one other factor of your choosing, could be more than one, but at least one other factor relating to the home energy need of that household. It could be the fuel type, whether they heat by electric versus propane, because there's a wide variance in the prices of those fuels, or the size of their home, whether it's a single family versus an apartment, or whether there's a presence of a vulnerable member like an elder or a young child. Next slide. Also remember that the statute requires that you set aside a reasonable amount of your funding each year for crisis assistance And that money must be available through at least March 15th so that you can help households that are in a crisis situation. The statute also requires that you make a decision on that application and provide some sort of assistance to that crisis within 18 hours of the application being submitted if it's a life-threatening crisis, or 48 hours if it's a regular crisis. What the statute at the federal level doesn't tell you is what is a crisis or what is a life-threatening crisis. Those are two policy decisions you have to decide as a tribe what situation for you is going to constitute a life-threatening crisis. For example, you might decide if someone is on a ventilator or other medical equipment that requires electricity and they're facing a disconnection, that would be a life-threatening crisis and you'd have to respond within 18 hours. So that's just one example. Of course, you need to conduct outreach so that your tribal members know about the program, how to apply, where to apply, all those details. There's also a requirement to provide a fair hearing so that people who apply for the program are aware at the application, when they submit an application, that if they want to contest being denied for assistance, or if they don't hear back on their application, or if they get a benefit but they think they would have qualified for a higher benefit, those are all examples of reasons why they could appeal the decision on their application and would be able to request a hearing from your office for a review of that decision on their application. Next slide. Of course, there are requirements. I mentioned the 90% of your funding must be obligated within the same fiscal year, 10% in the next federal fiscal year. To monitor your program as well, to make sure that not only your staff are following the rules and procedures, but that your partners like your utility companies and your deliverable fuel vendors are also doing what they're saying they're doing. If, for example, you approve a deliverable fuel shipment for to fill a tank, and then they go out and only give half a tank, well, they haven't done what they said they were going to do, and that's one way for you to monitor and keep those vendors making sure that they're doing what as they're expected to. Also, one way you can do that is negotiate written agreements with your utilities and vendor agreements so that both you and the vendors have clear expectations about how your relationship is going to work for LIHEAP. So, for example, if you're going to give them a LIHEAP benefit, your agreement might address that they will accept a pledge from your office, that even if they haven't received the payment yet, the fact that your office provides documentation that a household is approved for assistance and that a payment will be coming within X number of days would prevent a disconnection, or you might be able to get a deliverable fuel shipment. So there are lots of different things that can be included in those agreements, and it's a great way to try to assure that your LIHEAP customers are being treated fairly by the vendors. And of course, making sure that you have certain internal controls to prevent waste, fraud, and abuse. And remember that if your tribe receives at least $500,000 of total federal funding, not just from LIHEAP, but any federal program, that there's an annual independent audit requirement. And there will be guidance coming out shortly about a slight change to that amount of money is actually going up to $750,000 in the near future. So just remember there's an annual audit requirement, and it's incumbent on you to make sure you're aware of any findings related to your LIHEAP and that you work to resolve those findings and avoid having those repeat audit problems. So moving on to your tribal leadership and where they can be of most help to you in running your LIHEAP, there are really 4 key areas that came to mind in working with your tribal councils and your tribal chairpersons. So really making sure, for one thing, that there's really good, regular, timely communication between your office and our office is very helpful. Making sure that they're participating in your annual plan development and submission to OCS. I mentioned before about how your tribal chairperson or his designee has to certify and sign in our system on the plan. Also having their involvement in negotiating any agreements, whether it's with your utility vendors or if it's with the state, or if you're a tribe being served by a tribal consortium. Those are all ways that your tribal leadership will be very important to you in negotiating those written agreements. And finally, just ensuring that you have some controls and accountability in the program through good monitoring. So I'm just going to quickly run a little more through each of these. Again, going back to communication, one thing that we see pretty often is that there's at times a fair amount of turnover in who the tribal LIHEAP staff may be or our primary contact will be for LIHEAP. And that's fine. I mean, you can certainly change staff as often as you need to, and people retire or move on to other jobs. But what we really ask is that you have some process in place to notify us if you are aware that someone's going to be leaving, and let us know who we should contact in your office until you find a permanent replacement. Likewise, if someone new has come on board, that someone from your tribe notifies our staff of who the person is so that not only we know who to contact and keep informed of any policy guidance that we issue throughout the year, but also try to schedule kind of a welcome orientation call or webinar, so one-on-one we can kind of talk through what the program requirements are so that your new coordinator feels comfortable with what they're taking on and can ask any questions of us that they have. Letting us know if your contact information has changed. Sometimes your email addresses or your telephone numbers or your addresses may change, or some of the information we need for your grant award letter, like your DUNS number or your tax number, may change. So letting us know that as soon as possible is really critical to making sure that we know how to reach you, but also to make sure that the money is going to the right place timely. And then, of course, there are times of year where your staff may be out for extended periods, whether it's for, harvesting and hunting or for cultural events, powwows, and what have you. And so it's really helpful to our staff to know, okay, for the next couple of weeks, it's going to be, difficult to reach anybody, or maybe you have one person that can be a backup contact. So just letting us know that helps us plan so that we know how to make sure you get the communications from our office that you really need to know. And again, remember there are staff that we call liaisons in our office. They are assigned to, there's one liaison for every grantee, and so that's your primary contact. If you have any questions at any time, you can reach out to them by phone or email, or if you're in the neighborhood, drop by for a face-to-face meeting, and they'll be happy to answer any questions you have. So the next issue was the plan development. I can't stress enough how important it is to really put some thought into that plan. There is a requirement in our statute that you get public participation on the plan, which means that you're making your draft plan available to your tribal community so that they can know what you're expecting to do for the coming program year, and they can provide you comments. So you need to let them know how they can provide you comments, and then you need some time to consider those comments so that if you need to make any adjustments to your plan, that's done before you submit the plan to our office. So that's a great way to get your tribal council and your tribal chairperson involved in knowing what you're expecting to do for the coming program year, having their comments incorporated first of all, because they probably have to review and approve your plan before you submit it to us. And I already talked about the extension request. So next slide. So I kind of touched on negotiating agreements. Again, you could have agreements with utility vendors. You can have resolutions with tribal consortia to serve you. You can also have an agreement with the state in which your reservation is located, and that may cover more than one state. And why this is important, it's certainly not a requirement. It's completely voluntary, but it really is an advantage, we think, for tribes, because what the federal statute says is that absent an agreement between a tribe and a state regarding how much funding the tribe should get for LIHEAP, our office must look at the latest data on the number of income-eligible Indian households on the reservation and adjacent trust lands, and look at that in relation to the number of income-eligible households that will be served by the rest of the state. So basically, we're calculating a percentage of the state funding amount that will go to each directly funded tribe by our office. We have to rely on federal data for that. We turn to the Census Bureau. And so we know those are estimates. They're probably underestimated. And so it usually is more helpful to a tribe to try to work with their state LIHEAP colleague to say, look, we have additional data, whether it's fuel prices on your reservation, whether it's your own estimates of income-eligible households, or any other data that you feel is relevant to the need of your reservation for home energy assistance that you can then take to the state and negotiate with them to get a larger percentage of the state funding for your tribe. Because again, the reason why it's related to your state's allocation is because if a tribe does not apply to us to run their own LIHEAP, then we require the state to serve that tribe's members with LIHEAP. Because remember, there are over 500 federally recognized tribes, and only about 150 are directly funded tribe grantees of ours. So the rest are being served by the state LIHEAP. So in the case where a tribe applies directly to us, we're saying, state, we're pulling out X number of dollars because this tribe is going to run their own LIHEAP. So if that's the case for you, being able to negotiate that agreement so that you get a higher percentage of the state allocation based on your needs, which you would know best, can be very helpful. And then the agreement can also touch on other things that are helpful to your running your program. It can talk about sharing resources. You're going to hear from the Lumbee Nation shortly about how they share resources with the state in terms of computer systems and data, working with state colleagues to try to avoid serving the same households by mistake. Also just being clear about service territory and if people are living off reservation, who's serving whom. Having good communication with the state. Of course, the more we all communicate, the more effective we're going to be in serving people with LIHEAP. Next slide. Okay, so I think I covered that. Next slide. And then lastly, just overseeing accountability. So again, making sure you have adequate staff to run the program, especially at those peak times of year, making sure that there's regular, timely communication, not only with our office, but among all of your tribal staff that has some involvement in LIHEAP. So often we encourage your fiscal or budget staff to also participate in our trainings and on our webinars so that they also understand what's expected for LIHEAP in terms of any reporting requirements or tracking the how the money is being spent, because that all has to get reported back to us at the end of each year. Making sure that that your program is actually, again, remember your tribal chairperson is putting his or her name, certifying to the plan, saying we're going to follow these 15 federal requirements in particular. So having a way of monitoring that progress throughout the year so that it's not all falling on the shoulders of just your coordinator. They feel like they're supported by the tribe in running that program, which can be very stressful at times. You know, people, households are definitely stressed. There's a lot of poverty out there, and so people are coming in at a time when they are in dire need. So working together as a team to be able to serve them as quickly and accurately as possible is in all of our best interests. And just, again, with trainings, we offer these webinars. These are 6 webinars in particular that we're doing this year on different aspects of LIHEAP. We're also going to be having a national grantee training meeting, hopefully in the spring, which we'll be announcing shortly with the location and dates and what have you. So, and again, you can always reach out to your staff person here at our office with any questions that you have throughout the year. So please know we're here for you. At times, it may take us a little while to get back to you, depending on how busy we are here. But if you don't hear back shortly, please just keep at us, because we want to make sure that we're of service to you. Next slide. And the next slide. We just provided some additional resources for you. So again, Brilliant is our training and technical assistance contractor. They're providing support for us this year so that it's not just our few staff trying to help all of you. We'll be sharing information shortly about a peer-to-peer assistance network so that we can try to match tribes with other tribes where you can share information about how you're running your programs, put you in contact with each other. We're also going to be having some Brilliant staff go out on site to follow up with any monitoring findings that you might have from when our staff come out to look at your program, so that you have some support trying to figure out how to improve the programs, and of course the webinars that we've talked about. The link up here is to the contact information for the staff at our office here in DC. Next slide. And here's just some additional links to different resources online, the Tribal Manual, the main LIHEAP website, which is for our office, which has all of our guidance documents, our Dear Colleague letters, our information memoranda, our action transmittals where we're actually telling you we need you to respond back or take some action within a certain time frame. All of that gets sent out by email to your LIHEAP coordinator and gets posted to our website. So it's very important to be aware of those and to read those timely so that you make sure you're meeting any deadlines and being aware of any changes to policies and rules. And then the clearinghouse is an additional support that's under a contract through the National Center for Appropriate Technology, or NCAT, based in Montana. And so it's a great resource to learn about how other tribes and other states are running their LIHEAP, kind of the variation that you'll see out there. And also there's a great link on there for people who want to find out where's their closest site to apply for LIHEAP. There's that resource as well. And I think that's the end of my slides, and so I'll turn it back to Benita. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lauren, and I'll just keep things moving along and turn it over to Gina Williamson and Judy Dixon. Ladies, are you there?
Yes, ma'am, we are.
All right, take it away.
All right, first I just want to say, Lauren, that was awesome. I really appreciate you, and I feel like I have learned some things and wrote those all down. Thank you so very much. And Miss Judy is here with me, and we've taken notes. We have found that it is really an honor to serve the way we serve in helping our folks better understand the purpose of LIHEAP. And we do that through our tribal community. We have social gatherings each month. And we don't do a lot of business, but we do always discuss LIHEAP and the accountability that we all must have and the ways that we can improve for each other and better serve each other. And one of those ways is with the community and the tribal council and the LIHEAP committee all serving as a team in order to accomplish having an effective LIHEAP program within our sovereignty, which is a blessing indeed. During our community gatherings, our socials, there's always interesting things that come up that we might not have considered. Our tribal council needs to stay abreast of what is going on and sometimes has wonderful input or wonderful questions. The LIHEAP committee is actually from the tribal council, the people that serve on the LIHEAP committee, and they are accessible 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Sometimes that's really difficult, but we've had some situations here within our state that have made that almost a necessity. We are reachable in a lot of different ways and have been. One of our reasons for ever starting to work with LIHEAP or OCS and was we had some individuals that went into a state office and they were desperate and they asked for help, and the office turned them down because they were Indian people, and we just really didn't understand that. So we worked very hard and tried to achieve our own grant, and I'm very thankful that we had the opportunity to do that. One of the things that we found is that we had a lot of elders that weren't being taken care of because they were illiterate and they were embarrassed or they were too prideful to ask for help. And even today we have people, especially elders, that will say, no, I don't, y'all work with the young folks and make sure they're taken care of, just some really humble folks. So we try really hard to get in contact with our elders and work with them, and oh gosh, it's a huge responsibility to maintain a relationship with everybody all the time. So you have to have this wonderful channel of communication, and we are blessed with technology these days to be able to do that. We do have our monthly socials. We do discuss LIHEAP. Like I said, we don't discuss a lot of business, but since this concerns everybody, we are wide open, and we certainly don't know everything. Our tribal center is open 6 out of 7 days, so we do have people that just walk in. They are part of the tribe or come in to work on some things or some artistry or have questions. We have Facebook pages. And I know it may seem silly for a tribe to have Facebook pages so people can go and communicate with them, but it was only 3 years ago we had some terrible weather conditions, and we had tornadoes, and we were without electricity within this area about 9 days, many people 2 weeks. So we need to be able to communicate with each other even when there's disastrous things going on, and that certainly was. So we did use Facebook pages to communicate, and email, and U.S. mail, and the phone calls that were like spider webs reaching out to one another to take care of each other and also to find each other. That was a long 2 weeks, I'll say. We also nowadays have texting. We also have a newsletter. And so, like I said, there's a number of us that are available 24 hours a day. But when a family needs help, I know they need it then. So we try to be available for that. Judy, did you have anything to add to that? I'm so sorry.
No, not a word. Thank you.
Next slide, please. We have found that one of the real assets within this program is to work closely with your local utilities and become a partners. I know that's a term that's already been used, but by golly, that's what you become. You do become a partner in working on behalf of your people. So in the past, the assurances wanted are have had to go through U.S. mail or faxes, and now we can work even with email with a lot of electric companies and people that we work with, which is a blessing. That really does save a lot of time for everyone. We do have some individuals that work with us specifically for wood, and we have a vast number of folks that have propane, and the prices there, as Ms. Lauren said, vary, but they're generally higher than your average electric bill. We've also found that in working with this program with any people, and I don't care if it's a church, a school, a club, but any kind of community and a sovereign, and us being a tribe, that there is going to be a number of people that may want to take advantage. And so what we have found is when we have people that have been untruthful with us, because sometimes they're just scared. They're scared if they put down everybody that's in their house that they're not going to be able to get a bill paid that they really, really need to have paid. But in working with those folks, if they just understand, if they tell the truth, most of the time they're going to qualify anyway. But if they fib to us, and we know our people, we know who's dating who's sick, who's up, who's down. You know your own people. So those kind of things are not just go unnoticed. And we do keep an eye open in those situations for future things that do evolve. And we also work with our non-Indian LIHEAP community, because if anybody ever is fraudulent or does try to lie to us, we don't take very lightly to that. So we communicate that information to any local LIHEAP community action that may be available to them, so that no one is taken advantage of through someone who would do that. I can say that probably in the past, I think it's 16 years, that's probably happened twice. But on the other hand, we also discuss various ideas and areas of improvement with other LIHEAP programs around us. And I hope that it's been an asset for them. It certainly has been beneficial to us. And if there's anything, Ms. Judy, you would like to add?
The only thing that I found that as far as like communicating with the different utility companies, whether it be electric or propane or somebody that's providing with the wood, it's important to establish a relationship with them. When you first start out, it might be a little bit slow, and you might have to fax them a letter over on your letterhead in order for them to start feeling comfortable. Or you can draw up agreements. That's been brought to our attention that that's a possibility of having an agreement with the different utility companies. But the main thing is, whenever possible, try to talk to the same individual if they have the same individual available.
Correct.
It helps with the communication process.
Yeah.
You can't always do that, but whenever possible, that is a big asset.
Well, we wish everybody success, and we are honored to be able to share with you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Judy and Gina, for sharing your experiences. I want to turn it over to Tammy Maynard now.
Hi, how's everyone doing today? I hope everybody's warm and taking good care of themselves. My name is Tammy Maynard, and I'm the Director of Governmental Affairs for the Lumbee Tribe of North Carolina. And today I'm going to discuss tribal sovereignty and self-determination as it relates to the implementation of our tribal LIHEAP program. Next slide. We can go to the next one. For many tribes, tribal sovereignty means the ability to manage its own affairs, existing as a nation, having control over our own destiny, living unencumbered by the yoke of an outside power, determining and redetermining our fate. However, there's a difference in that meaning of tribal sovereignty between American Indian tribes and the federal government. This has been the nature of the relationship between Native American tribes in the United States since the very earliest treaties. Next slide. For the federal government, it often means that we are a domestic dependent nation that exists within the boundaries of the United States. They see us as wards of the United States, even though we operate and manage some of our internal tribal affairs. And that's the mindset of our federal government. And just today, I was reading an article, and our congressman he was out in the Navajo Nation, out that way, and he was speaking today, and his comment was, and he made it very clear that we were, in fact, wards of the United States. And that comment has truly outraged American Indians across the country today. So that's today's headline, is about this congressman who made that statement. And it's really, really sad because, you know, we are a sovereign nation who can control our own destiny, and we have that opportunity here with the implementation of block grants such as the LIHEAP program, NAHASDA, and other programs that tribes operate. And today that's what we're going to discuss, is how we control our destiny, how we are a sovereign nation, and we have the unique opportunity to do that here today. Next slide. As the director of the Governmental Affairs Program, the department here at the Lumbee Tribe, I have the awesome responsibility of helping to ensure that our tribal leaders understand the funding for the LIHEAP program, how self-determination comes into play in us determining how we will operate that, that program, and the parameters that we have the opportunity to set within the program. We have the responsibility of also making our tribal leaders aware of budget cuts, what's happening locally and nationally with the program, with budget cuts. We encourage our tribal leaders to attend the National Congress of American Indians because that's where we get resolutions of support, and we've been very successful in going to them asking for support and helping promote the LIHEAP program along with other block grants that are operated by tribal programs. We also need our tribal council to understand that tribal council resolutions play a critical part in showing support for increased funding for the LIHEAP program. Encouraging them that on LIHEAP Action Day to be present, go to the meetings on Capitol Hill, work the halls, know your congressman, work with your local your senators, your congressmen within the area, your district representatives, to make them aware of issues and concerns you have about the LIHEAP program. Some of the things that matter are when you can share instances and tell them about real-life experiences of people who don't have heating or cooling mechanisms in their home and how this program has affected their lives. So our tribal council need to know those situations and be active in the community. One of the final things is that they must develop, our tribal leaders need to know how important it is to develop and maintain good working relationships with our state HHS office. It's important to maintain that relationship so that they understand the needs of the community, the needs of the American Indian population within the state. Next slide. Here at the Lumbee Tribe, the executive branch of our government, we are very similar to the United States. We are set up like the United States government. And what we have here on the executive side is that we have to determine where we will receive our funding. As Lauren earlier stated, it may not always be advantageous to work out an MOU with your state office. It may be better to receive funding directly from the federal government, but that's a decision that the leadership has to make, what works best for you. In doing that, for us, we made the determination that it was better to do an MOU with the state of North Carolina. In determining what was best, we have to look at lots of factors. What is the rate at which you're receiving funding? How is it determined? Is it fair? Are you using census data? You have the unique opportunity to use tribal data and really exert your self-determination and using tribal data. Are you maintaining tribal data that's sufficient enough to take to the state office? Do you know what your poverty levels are for your tribal membership? Those are the kinds of issues, and those are the questions that are going to be asked of you when you go to the states and ask to negotiate your rate or to even start the process. You have to have good data, good information. You may be able to use, those of you who are from federally recognized tribes, Indian Health Services data. Of course, if you have your own tribal data, that's even better. You're really showing that you have self-determination. You're exerting political autonomy with your tribal membership. That's really important. So if you're not gathering data, you need to be gathering that information because it is critical. And as I stated, we do work with our state very closely. We're still in the process of negotiating a rate with our state. Our rate hasn't been renegotiated since the 80s, since it was implemented in the early 80s. And you have to handle this process very delicately, and it needs to be handled with tact, because if you're not very careful, you could end up reducing your funding, and you don't want to do that. Next slide. In our case here, our census data reflected that we were being underfunded by the state. And in order to ensure that we got that point across, we've had the opportunity, thank goodness with our chairman and our LIHEAP manager, Patrick Strickland, we've been to the North Carolina legislature. We've sat down with the secretary or the undersecretary. We've spoke to the governor about our position. We've had statistical data to place in front of them that is internal to the tribe. And this is truly your tribal sovereignty at work, when you can use your information, your data, to express your opinion and to physically show that we are entitled to more for the membership. We have the opportunity here to really develop a program that works best for our tribal members. Next slide. Along this process, as Lauren stated earlier, it is so important that we keep federal staff involved in all communications. If there's a problem, if you run into a halt, you can't seem to move forward, you know, it's really nice to be able to pick up the phone, call them, explain where you're at. They're not caught off guard, of course, because you've been keeping them aware. If it's just shooting them an email, that's just as important. But oftentimes the federal staff may be able to help you mediate a situation that you can't seem to get the discussions going again. So I think that you can use the federal staff to help move your tribe in a positive direction in your negotiations with an MOU. Next slide. Before I discuss this slide, one of the things I want to highlight is that when we talk about MOUs with the state, there's reasons why we need to have an MOU. That MOU may spell out your service area, what areas you're actually going to serve. It may help to decrease duplication of services so that your tribal DSS and the state the state DSS aren't serving the same people and overlapping services, so that more people can be served with the money that we have available, because we don't want to see a duplication of services. We also have the opportunity to share software, share systems, negotiate what can we have access to that the state has access to. So that's a savings when we don't have to buy new software or buy licenses for software, when we can negotiate those through an MOU. So having an MOU with the state is critical, it's important, and it can help in the overall integrity of the implementation of the LIHEAP program. But when we talk about the LIHEAP program, sometimes we have implementation issues as it relates to our tribal leadership, and what we hear is, oh, we're not serving at the same rate or the same level at which the DSS is serving people. Well, that's exactly right. Sometimes we service in a unique way. We do what's better for our tribal members. We may model a program that meets the needs for our tribal members throughout the seasons versus it meeting only a heating need. It may be that we see the need for there to be monies available for cooling as well as heating. And that's a decision that the tribal leadership gets to make. And you get that information when you do those public hearings, when you sit down with your tribal council and your tribal chairman, and you see the direction in which they want this tribal program to operate. So we have a unique opportunity to model a program that, again, is meeting the needs of our tribal members. And no, we're not a utility payment program. We often hear our tribal counselors say, will you pay this person's light bill? Well, we can pay the light bill if there's a heating or cooling crisis in the home. So we have to go through and educate. This is not a utility payment program. This is a heating and cooling program. So these are some of the issues that we run into in the implementation of the program. We also have the unique opportunity to leverage our resources here within our tribal government, and I would encourage everyone to do that, where you have other programs, whether it's the REACH program, if it's your NAHASA program that you operate, you have the opportunity to leverage your resources so that you can serve more tribal members. And That's been a program that we've done here internally at the Lumbee Tribe, leveraging resources that has really, really taken the money a lot farther. And that's what it's about, is being able to serve our tribal members, serve more, and provide them excellent service. Next slide. When we look at the tribal programs, our tribal mission and goals are often very distinct and different. We ask ourselves here, are we eliminating the crisis? Our local DSS doesn't always have the same mission and goals that we have. Are we working for the long-term good of a tribal member? I often hear our tribal LIHEAP staff talk about so much more than the temporary need that they have right now. We are like social workers in that we want to look at the long-term health and safety of our tribal members, and we care about that. We educate our tribal leadership often on self-determination and how we have the unique opportunity to structure our LIHEAP program so tribal members receive assistance year-round versus receiving assistance for a period of 8 weeks or 6 weeks. We realize that there's a need here pretty much year-round in our tribal territory for our tribal members, and we have structured a program we feel like that is a good program that's meeting those needs. Next slide. You know, when we talk about tribal sovereignty, there's a particular situation that comes to my mind, and it came to mind in Patrick's attention. He's our LIHEAP manager, and it was that our tribal members who attend our local DSS office, unfortunately, can't get through the front door to receive services because they are American Indian. And there are services that they are eligible for. But when they get to the door because they're American Indian, they can't get through because they're being told that the Lumbee Tribe administers the programs that you have access to, and that's not true. So Patrick, in being persistent and determined, made some phone calls, and tribal chairman sent a letter to the vendor asking for the opportunity to administer those particular funds on behalf of the vendor. And now we have an opportunity to apply to administer those funds, and it's because we're exercising our tribal sovereignty and recognizing a problem that's in our community. And I think that when you're doing what you're supposed to be doing as the LIHEAP office and as the tribe, you become aware of the injustices that are occurring in our service area to our tribal members. And we have to do something. And I think that in order for us to gain the respect of the state, the county, even the federal government, we have to sometimes stand up and do things that maybe are not always popular, and this is one of them. If we have an opportunity to administer a program, then we will do it. We'll do what we have to provide services to our tribal members. Next slide. I think I already touched on this, but when tribal leadership often come into the office, we have to remind them that this is a heating and cooling assistance program. We're not a program that pays light bills and just utility bills. One of the ways that we help to help our tribal leadership understand this is by creating brochures for our tribal council to disseminate the correct information. This becomes a teaching tool for our leadership, as well as a great way to get the correct information out. If they have to share that with someone who maybe cannot read, and we have lots of elders who can't read, it helps them to get it right. So then they start to reemphasize the message that we are a heating and cooling program. We also work with our tribal council to hold community meetings throughout the territory where programs are discussed, and we are facilitators. We give our council members that opportunity to share the information with their constituents, which again reiterates that this is a heating and cooling program. We're not a program about paying utility bills, which is one of the most critical issues that we have that we constantly have to explain to our tribal membership, is that it's a heating and cooling crisis program. Next slide. Once our tribal leadership grasped, then they have grasped, but that we are a tribal government, and that the law allows the tribe to determine who we will serve and how we will meet the assurances laid out by the law, they have begun to comprehend what self-determination is and how it can be applicable to a block grant such as the Tribal LIHEAP program. Again, we have the unique opportunity to determine our own fate in the implementation of tribal programs. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Tammy. We really appreciate that. And thank you to all of our speakers for sharing with us your experiences and the things that you've done. I'd like to open the floor up for questions now. And so if you'd like to ask a question, if you look on your control panel on the right-hand side of your screen, there's a little arrow that expands your control panel. And you can either type in your question, and that helps us to unmute your line, or you can click on the little hand icon, and that raises your hand, so that way we can also call on you as well. And again, in order for us to be able to unmute your line, if you can type in your audio pin on your phone, which the audio pin is also in the control panel, that helps us to unmute your line. All right? And so it looks like we have a couple questions in the queue. Our first question comes from Terry Ross. Go ahead, Terry. Your line is unmuted if you'd like to ask your question now.
I think I got it answered by Lauren. She just emailed me the manual that I was asking for. But I liked the presentation by Lumbee. Do you have brochures that you can share so we can get some ideas from it?
Yes, yes. We'd be more than glad to share those with you. Just, what is your name?
Terry Ross, San Carlos Apache Tribe in Arizona.
Well, thank you, Terry.
And
I will
Patrick
get
has my email address.
Yes, yes, great.
Okay.
And if you'd like, we can also share that with the whole group as well. So
that'd be
Tammy,
great.
if you can send that to us, we'll make sure to share it with the group.
Wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you. All right. Thank you so much, Terry.
Thank you.
Okay. And it looks like we have another question coming in. This time, this is from Katie Stabno. Go ahead, Katie. Your line is unmuted if you'd like to ask your question.
Well, as I was typing it, I think you were answering it, that you would share the materials with everyone. We're in the improvement phase on our materials and procedures as well, so I would definitely appreciate connecting to that. Thank you.
Definitely. We'd be more than happy to help facilitate that. Does anybody else have any other questions for any of our speakers today?
I think maybe Crystal Bailey has a question.
Yep. Crystal, unfortunately, your line is still, if you haven't put in your access audio pin, once you put that in, we can call on you and unmute your line. And I'm gonna put up our final slide just so everyone can see. If you have any further questions, I know sometimes it helps to kind of think a little bit about what everybody presented. And if you have any follow-up questions, you can always email me. My email address is on the screen right now, and I'd be happy to send that to any of our presenters and help facilitate any information that you needed to get as well. And this also shows the link for the website where we will have this webinar recording posted at a later time, along with the slides. And Jennifer, I see that you have your hand raised as well, but you have not put in your audio pin yet, so I can't unmute your line. If you want to type in your question, I'm happy to read that to the group as well. And that was for Jennifer Letji. I'm sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly. I apologize. Okay. It looks like we have another hand raised from Radley Davis. Go ahead, Radley. Your line is unmuted.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
I came in late, so I just my staff wanted to know would there be any the budget that's any anticipation that the budget's going to increase for LIHEAP budgets?
Hi, Radley. This is Lauren. You know, we won't know till Congress actually passes that final budget, but if I had to guess and look into my crystal ball, I'd say it's probably not likely that we're going to see much of an increase this year, given a lot of other needs out there that the federal government is trying to meet. So that's why, while we've been under this temporary budget, we held back a little bit of the funding, about 10%, to wait to see what our final figure is going to be for the year. You know, you've gotten that initial award if you submitted your plan and it was deemed complete by our staff. You should have gotten that award letter on October 15th, and then hopefully we'll have some news very shortly about you know, releasing the remaining funding once we have our final budget. But I personally would not anticipate an increase.
Thank you. We knew. I guess I knew as much. It was a question that I wanted to ask. Thank you.
Sure. Yep.
Thanks so much, Radley, for your participation. And again, if anyone would like to ask a question, you can go ahead and type it into your control panel, or you can click on your raised hand icon and I can unmute your line.
I don't see a raised hand button.
It's a little hand icon right there on your control panel. If you expand your control panel out, by clicking on the arrow, it expands, and there's a little hand.
Wow, technology is amazing. I do have a question. I was listening very carefully to everyone, and I know that we were somewhat in, I guess, a quandary when we had the tornadoes that ripped through the state, and we couldn't serve the great number of people that we needed to serve all at one time. And I guess right now I kind of feel stupid because it never dawned on me one time to call on anyone concerning help. We had a list of people that we went by when we were looking for help during this time, and you weren't listed. So it never entered our mind to contact you at all. So I guess I feel kind of stupid. But this has really opened my eyes to a lot of things, and I appreciate the opportunity to communicate with one another, so thank you.
Hi, this is Lauren again. That's a really interesting question. So you probably heard me talk at the beginning of the call about the emergency contingency funding through LIHEAP. That also is subject to funding availability through our annual appropriation from Congress. The last year that we had the separate funding for emergency contingency was in 2011, I believe. And when we had that for several years, it would usually be about $100 million to $200 million for the whole country for the year, and we would release funds as needed throughout the year based on what we were seeing happening out there. And so, you know, there's a fair amount of discretion with those funds in terms of whether it gets released to all grantees. If it's situation that's affecting the entire country versus, like say with the economy, or if it's more of a localized situation, like in the situation of Hurricane Katrina, where maybe just a certain region is affected, and so trying to target the awards to that area. But we don't have that funding. We did not have that funding in 2014, and so far we don't have that funding in 2015. However, we also talked a little bit about providing crisis assistance through your LIHEAP. So as you're developing your plans prior to the start of each program year, part of what the federal rules are asking you to do is think about, based on the needs that you see and sort of the issues that you see crop up from year to year, whether it's certain weather patterns like tornadoes or hurricanes or floods, fires, what have you, what's kind of a reasonable amount of money that you need to set aside to help people who are in need of some sort of crisis assistance, whether it's disaster related or otherwise, and then trying to define that, again, which households qualify for a crisis payment, which households qualify for a life-threatening crisis payment, and what's the form of that assistance. So when you are trying to respond to a disaster, for example, again, with this being a block grant program, you have a lot of flexibility in defining for your program how you're going to use your LIHEAP to address that disaster if it impacts a household's home energy. We can't forget that LIHEAP is always connected to the home's heating and cooling. So, for example, Hurricane Katrina, if someone's home lost power or their home was completely inhabitable and they had to have temporary housing, you could choose to use your LIHEAP assistance to help get households into some temporary housing. The focus being temporary because they need access to heating and cooling, and they've lost that because they've been displaced. LIHEAP cannot be used for long-term assistance with mortgage or rent or what have you, but if it's temporary because a household's been affected by a disaster, you can choose to offer that kind of assistance. You can also choose to try to set up an emergency shelter to provide sort of a heating or a cooling center where people in your community can gather during that disaster. You can also try to provide in-kind benefits, whether it's giving blankets out during if it's a critical point in the winter where it's 80 below zero and people are losing power and what have you, or can't get their deliverable fuel shipments. You can, we've seen in some areas of the country where tribes will have loaner programs. So up in Alaska, I know we've seen different consortia lending out Toya stoves to households and other kind of additional sources of heat so that if they run out of their primary heating source, they have a secondary source to rely on. We see some programs trying to invest in generators, so there's like a backup supply for energy. So there's a whole range of things that really you can be very, I want to say, creative in brainstorming about different ways you can use your LIHEAP, as long as it's really focused on making sure that household has sufficient heating and cooling and that they're still eligible for the program. Keep in mind, too, that we've mentioned several times that your plan is due to us September 1. And as you know, we work pretty closely with all of you throughout the fall to make sure that we understand your plan, and we might need you to kind of clarify some of your responses in the plan. But if you see your needs changing throughout the program year, you can change your plan to make sure that your program is still being relevant and addressing what you're facing at that time. And so for the most part, you do not need our prior approval from HHS to make reasonable adjustments to your LIHEAP program throughout the year. We do ask that you notify our office in writing. You can through the OLDC system, submit a revised plan, which we consider a plan amendment or modification. And that way we all have access to it through the web-based system and know when you made the change. And you can flag for us in the remarks section a little note saying, you know, what parts you've changed and when those changes took effect. And we just ask that you submit that revision to us within a reasonable amount of time after you've instituted that change to your program. So an example for us is what happened in the winter of 2014, where we saw the propane crisis. And, you know, kind of for a lot of us came out of the blue, and so we saw price spikes for propane, and we saw trouble trying to actually get a propane shipment to some of our households, especially the ones that are more remotely based, more rural, and difficult to get to when the weather gets really bad and those roads are really treacherous, or your rivers are frozen over, so really limits the options for getting the propane out there. So what we saw was that LIHEAP grantees were trying to be responsive in the moment, and so they were changing some of their eligibility rules. So for example, if a program had normally set their eligibility at 125% of federal poverty, some of them were adjusting their income eligibility, and some of them were even doing it just for propane households and saying propane households you know, can be eligible for up to 150% or what have you. Some grantees were also changing the definitions of their crisis assistance to specifically target propane users. Other grantees were adjusting their benefit matrices or benefit plans so that households that were using propane could get a higher benefit while the propane prices were so much higher than usual. And so, you know, grantees are making those changes, and then they were submitting their written plan amendments to our office shortly thereafter so that we knew those changes. And, you know, while that's a temporary situation, they can always adjust it back again. So just keep in mind, you really do have a lot of flexibility, and if you ever have a question about whether you think a certain decision is within your discretion or whether it's something that you have to follow in the federal rules, just reach out and give us a call or send us an email.
Right. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Lauren. That was really helpful. I was able to receive the question from Jennifer, and she asks, is a tribe allowed to help a family twice a year if the tribe's LIHEAP policy states that a low-income applicant is eligible for services twice a year? Or does it need to strictly state an applicant is only allowed LIHEAP services once a year, and we would need to change our policies to once-a-year service followed by our payment matrix according to their income?
Okay, again, a really interesting question. This is Lauren again. You probably will hear this answer from us quite a bit, and the answer is it really depends on what you want to do. The federal rules do not specify how many LIHEAP benefits or payments a specific household can get within one program year. So that is one of the policy decisions that each of you needs to think about for your program year in terms of how many different types of LIHEAP benefits one household can get, and can they get more than one benefit of a specific type of LIHEAP assistance. So you know there's the heating assistance. You have the option of also providing cooling assistance, the option of providing some weatherization assistance, furnace repair and air conditioning units. So, and then the crisis assistance. So the crisis is a requirement, but you have some options with some of these other different forms of assistance. So we do see some grantees that say you get one benefit a year and that's it, because we're going to try to serve as many households as we can. We see other grantees that say, well, we're going to structure our benefits a little differently. We're going to allow a household to apply for each type of assistance that we offer, whether it's heating, cooling, weatherization, crisis, and as long as they meet the requirements that we have for each of those types of assistance, they can get each of those once. And we still see other grantees that say, for example, there are some years, I think 2011 was a good year to look at, where we were getting additional funding from Congress throughout the year up until, I want to say, late April or May of that year. So each of you were continuing to get additional grant award letters from us. And so some grantees, by the time you got our last grant award letter, had already more or less closed your heating programs and may not have necessarily been planning on a cooling program. So some of you made sure that your policies reflected that you would issue what we call sometimes a supplemental benefit to the household that you already served that year. So again, there's really no clear-cut right or wrong answer in the federal statute or regulations on this. However, the one thing I'll keep emphasizing over and over again is because the federal rules give you so much flexibility, it's absolutely critical that each of you have your own LIHEAP policy manual or operations manual in addition to the tribal manual that we provide. So our tribal manual is trying to spell out for you different decision points that you need to make. But then we turn to you to see what written policies each of you have for approaching these different things, since so much of the decision making is in your hands. And so it's just critical that before you decide to issue two benefits to the same household, your policies reflect that you're allowed to do that and what the circumstances are. So it's very clear to your intake workers how that should be processed.
Great. And actually, along those lines, we had one of our grantees ask us saying that they're a new coordinator and they were looking for some guidance on when it comes to developing their own policy and procedures. And they were asking if some other attendees on this call would be happy to share their policy or procedures with this person. This is from Star Narcomi. So if you have some policy manuals that you can share with us that we can send on, please email them to me. That would be really greatly appreciated.
Sorry, this is Lauren. If you jump to slide 25 for a quick second.
Oh, yeah. Let me go back real quick. Sorry, computer's acting slow.
Okay. Well, on that slide, that's where we talk about additional resources related to LIHEAP. And I believe it's, here we go, the third resource down that says LIHEAP Clearinghouse website. When you go to that website, you'll see a bar near the top where it says tribal information, tribal programs. And when you click on that, you get a drop-down menu of different things that you can look at. And I believe one of the options under there is basically plans and manuals. And when you click that option, it's going to give you a pretty good sample of different tribal LIHEAP plans. And there's a good example manual from the Phillips tribe in Oregon, which is at the very bottom of that page. So you can get the link on there, and then if you'd like additional examples, certainly anyone on the phone today can share them, and you can also contact your staff person here, and we'll try to give you other examples.
Okay, that's very helpful. Thank you. Our next question comes from Nancy Carnley. Go ahead, Nancy, your line is unmuted.
I'm extremely confused over the veterans payments that they automatically qualify for, because I have researched and I cannot find the names or the titles of the programs that automatically qualify them, and I've asked a couple of VA reps and they don't know.
Okay,
I'm trying to find the slide. I dropped everything and I can't find the slide now that you was talking to about, because I printed it out.
Sure. It's interesting that you asked that question, because I could be wrong, but I don't think I've seen a LIHEAP plan where a grantee has chosen the veterans programs as a form of categorical eligibility, and that might be because people aren't sure which programs qualify. So it definitely is means-tested veteran programs. So some of those veteran programs that are actually looking at the income eligibility of those veterans. And we did a webinar on this. This was part of the webinar back in, I want to say August or September of this year, where we have a few slides on that. So I will try to pull that out so that we can send that out to all of you so that you can take a look at that. And if you have follow-up questions about it, just let one of us know.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. I know we've run over time, but we have a few more questions in the queue, so we really appreciate everybody's participation. Our next question comes from Ramona Oldman. Go ahead, Ramona. Your line is unmuted. Ramona, your line might be muted on your end. Okay, I'll go ahead and ask her a question. Our weatherization program is completely separate from LIHEAP. Would it benefit our tribe if we included this program into our LIHEAP module? Would it allow us to receive more funding if we did? I believe we only receive funding from the DOE at this moment.
Okay, hi Ramona, this is Lauren again. Yet another interesting question. I'm glad to hear all these different questions coming up today. So the Department of Energy, the U.S. Department of Energy runs the Weatherization Assistance Program, which is completely focused on weatherization and has very specific rules about how to run the weatherization program, how you need to first go out to the home and do what they call a home energy audit, where you screen for what kinds of weatherization activities to install in the home and make sure that you take certain precautions for hiring people to do the work and then making sure they pass an inspection and so on and so forth. And so that is a separate source of funding. My understanding is that currently every state gets funding for weatherization from Department of Energy, and I think there are 3 tribes that also get a direct grant from the Department of Energy. I think Navajo Nation, and I'm forgetting the other 2. I apologize. So if your tribe is not one of those 3 that's getting a direct grant from the Department of Energy, that means that your members are being served by your state's weatherization assistance program from the Department of Energy. And hopefully they're doing outreach so that you know about that and how to sign up for it. As far as the connection to your LIHEAP program, whether you choose to use some of your own LIHEAP funding for weatherization activities is not going to impact how much LIHEAP funding you get from our office. How much LIHEAP funding you get from our office is only driven by whether you have that agreement between your state and yourself about how much of the allocation we should give to your tribe, or if you don't have an agreement, then that latest census data that we have regarding your income-eligible households on your reservation and adjacent trust lands. However, though, you have that choice that of whatever money we're able to give you for LIHEAP, you can use up to 15% of that federal LIHEAP money towards low-cost weatherization activities on households. So things such as a little bit of insulation and caulking and things of that nature. And so by April 1, if you find that you have more of a need for weatherization, to provide weatherization assistance, and you still have some federal LIHEAP funding left, you can request our prior written approval to use up to 25% of your total federal funds from that fiscal year towards weatherization assistance. And so I've seen a couple of different approaches among tribes. Some tribes will, with their LIHEAP money, run their own weatherization program to supplement whatever households may try to apply for directly from the state. And so so that's something that your LIHEAP office, if they want to do that, you'd have to try to figure out again through your policy manual what are going to be the rules for that weatherization assistance that you're going to provide with LIHEAP funding. How are you going to determine which households qualify? How are you going to determine which weatherization measures you're going to do on their home? How are you going to ensure that the work is done properly so that the home is not put in an unsafe situation or unhealthy situation? And then I think I've seen at least one tribe, if not more, enter into a memorandum of understanding or an interagency agreement with the state weatherization agency. that's running the Department of Energy's Weatherization Assistance Program. And what they'll do is they'll give additional money to have more weatherization assistance provided to their tribal members. And yet it kind of puts the burden on that state agency to handle all the logistics of getting the work done and all of that, but they're just giving a little extra money to have it done for their tribal members. So those are just two different approaches I've seen out there. Well, really three is, get that WAP grant from the Department of Energy, and then you can also supplement some of your LIHEAP funding with that. Our only caution for those few of you that do have a separate Department of Energy weatherization grant is that if you are pooling different streams of funding, federal funding like LIHEAP, to do your weatherization, just to make sure that you are tracking those funds separately, because for LIHEAP, as you know on your household report that's required every September, we ask you how many households you served with LIHEAP heating, cooling, crisis, and weatherization assistance. So any of the LIHEAP money that you're setting aside for weatherization, we need to have you track to know how many of your households got that assistance specifically for weatherization. Hopefully that answers your question. If not, just follow up.
Thanks, Ramona, and thank you, Lauren. We have another question from Karina Ortiz. Go ahead, Karina. Your line is unmuted. I apologize if I said your name incorrect.
No, that's right, Karina Ortiz. I have a question about audits. I heard that the annual audits must be done for tribes that receive $500,000 in grants. Is that $500,000 in the fiscal year, or?
Hi, yes, this is Lauren. Yes, it's in the fiscal year, and so the current requirement is that it's $500,000 of any federal money that you get. So not just your LIHEAP grant award, but if you're getting Department of Energy funding or HUD funding or any other source, all of that total for the tribe, if it's more than $500,000, then there's this annual independent audit requirement. Those rules are just recently going through some changes, so that for fiscal years coming up, basically after this December 26th, that threshold bumps up to $750,000. So this is kind of a more complicated conversation, which we're going to try to organize a separate training on. But basically, at that point, it would be the total funding for the tribe of federal resources that are, $750,000 or more, and if you don't meet that threshold, if your tribe gets less than that amount in all of your federal resources, then there is not a requirement for an independent audit for that year. We certainly encourage you to still do an audit of your own, just because it's a good practice. It helps you kind of have a check and balance to make sure that your accounting records are in good shape and that you're A-OK with everything, but it isn't required at the federal level if you're below that threshold.
Karina, does that help answer your question?
So the audit is just an independent audit then?
Right. So if your tribe does get more than that threshold in total federal funding, it has to be an independent audit, meaning it can't be just your tribe auditing itself or your LIHEAP staff auditing themselves. Usually it's hiring an outside company, like an accounting firm, to come in and review all of your program records, a sample of your program records and your financial records, and then they give you a report back of whether you were in compliance with all those federal rules. And they'll usually make distinctions among federal programs that you get funding for about the level of review they'll do that year based on whether it's kind of a major program or a minor program for your tribe based on like the funding level and things of that nature.
Okay. Thanks a lot, Karina, for your question. We actually had a question from Gina Williamson, one of our speakers. Go ahead, Gina.
Actually, it's Judy.
Oh, hi, Judy.
She's going to ask a question. It's her question, and I'm afraid I may not express what she wants me to say.
Yes, I was listening to Lauren's presentation at the beginning, and she talked about the 10% of the funding that could be used towards administrative costs. But if you look at the training manual that is that y'all have the link to, it states in the manual in one of the assurances that the administrative fee was 20% of the first $20,000, and then 10% of any additional. I need some clarification on that. Is it the 10% or is it the 20%?
Right, great question. So I tried to gloss over that pretty quickly early on just because this is one of the few areas where the rules are different for tribal grantees versus state grantees. So for state grantees, they're limited to 10% of their total federal LIHEAP money for admin costs. For tribal grantees, as you just stated, it depends on how much federal LIHEAP money you get from us. And so for a tribe that gets less than $20,000 total in federal LIHEAP money in a given federal fiscal year between October 1 and September 30th, you get 20% of that grant. So say you get $10,000 total from us for the given year. That would mean you could use 20% of that, or $2,000, for admin costs. If your tribe gets more than $20,000 in federal LIHEAP money for the whole federal fiscal year, then that's where it's that split calculation where you get 20% of the first $20,000 you get, or $4,000, and then you get an additional 10% of the difference between that first $20,000 and however much extra funding you got from us that year. So say you got $100,000 total in federal LIHEAP money for 2015. That would mean you could use $4,000 of that first $20,000, and then an additional 10% of the difference between your $100,000 and the first $20,000, which is $80,000 is a difference. 10% of that is $8,000. So adding your $8,000 from the additional money and your $4,000 from the first bit of money, you would be able to use $12,000 total for the year if you got $100,000 in funding from us for that given year. So it gets a little confusing, and if you have any questions about calculating that throughout the year, just give one of us a call or an email, and we'll be happy to confirm how much you can use for admin costs that year.
Thank you.
And again, keep in mind, as you get additional money from us, you want to keep redoing that calculation so that you know exactly the total maximum that you have to use. So for example, for those of you who had plans that were complete when we issued funding on October 15th, you did your calculation then to know how much you could use so far for admin costs. And then once we get our final budget from Congress and we can release whatever remaining money we have left, then you'll want to recalculate what that total was of funding that you got from us for this year to know what your final admin cost cap is for the year.
Thank you.
So,
Thank
Lauren,
you very much.
Oh, thanks. If the 20% for administrative cost wasn't originally factored into their plan, they can change their plan to reflect that.
Right. So if you submitted a plan, say, end of August, September 1, and you were planning on, there's that question in the plan that says, please tell us the percentage of how you're going to use your LIHEAP funding by the different allowable uses: heating, cooling, crisis, weatherization, admin costs, carry over to use in the next federal fiscal year. So those are all estimates, and we know that. Say you were planning to use 5% for admin costs, and then you see, oh, well, actually our needs are much greater than that, so we're going to, we get less than $20,000 this year, we're eligible for the full 20%, we're going to go up to that. All you have to do is do a plan revision in OLDC and just change that answer and submit that to us, and we'll make a note of that. And if you need any help with submitting that revision or that modification, just let one of us know and we'll help you.
Okay.
Thank you.
And our last question was just a quick one, and that was also from STAR. And they were asking if the LIHEAP program uses the state median income or the federal income guidelines.
Right. So this is the beauty of the program. That is your choice as one of our directly funded grantees. The federal rules say you can choose if you want to use up to 150% of federal poverty or 60% of state median income, whichever of those is greater. You can go up to that. That's the federal cap. So it's for you to decide, do you want to base your income eligibility based on federal poverty or state median income? And if so, depending on which one you go with, what percent do you want to set it at? And that's something that we ask in your plan. So again, if that changes throughout the year, just submit us a revised plan so that we can know that you modified your program. And again, each spring we post on our website information about the calculations for state median income and for federal poverty. And so you can find those on our website under information memoranda. And again, just reach out to us if you don't see it.
Awesome. Well, at this time, we have no further questions in the queue. I want to give a big, big thank you to Lauren, Tammy, Gina, and Judy for speaking on today's webinar. And thank you to all of you who attended and asked these great questions. As a reminder, we will post the slides and the webinar recording in a few weeks on the Performance Measurement website, and we'll send out an email to remind everyone. So do any of our speakers have any other closing remarks or anything else they would like to say?
Just wanted to thank everybody. Thank you so much. I've learned a lot.
Fantastic. Well, have a wonderful rest of the day and a great weekend. And at this time, the webinar is now over.